Before we begin today's episode, just a brief content warning. Today we're going to be looking at 2 episodes from Season 4, The Field Where I Died and Sanguinarium. The Field Where I Died does contain themes of abuse against women and children. Sanguinarium is probably less objectionable, but it is an exceptionally gory episode and may trigger people if they have strong fear about hospitals and surgery. So do be warned if you do keep listening.
Hello and welcome to Things Are Getting Strange, an X-Files Rewatch podcast. I'm Nick.
And I'm Kim.
And I have some more weirdo news of a kind.
Oh gosh, what this week?
Well, okay, now this was a few weeks ago. There was a headline about a strange cylindrical object that washed up on an Australian beach, which no one knew what it was. A great big metal cylinder.
I've got to assume it was engraved with biblical verses and could also raise the dead?
No, unfortunately.
Oh.
It was just an empty cylinder. Oh, I thought we were going to go in War of the Worlds kind of perspective.
You want the cylinder that crashed down on the Commons?
Yes. So that was a brief mystery. Unfortunately, it rapidly turned out that it's actually from an Indian launch vehicle.
Oh, of course it is. Of course it is. Oh, it was a weather balloon all along.
Yeah, the usual government conspiracies. But I've just been taking note of it for the news part of the podcast because it's adjacent to it.
Yeah, I appreciate it. Keep doing it, it's fun.
I will, okay. More Senate hearings and more covered artifacts.
I just gossip with people on Twitter. You're putting more effort in than me.
Both are good. I think that's all for news, though, this week again.
Yeah, I don't have anything. Not even with Fall Fest looming within a month's time now, I think.
Well, we really have nothing to talk about once that's passed.
I know. We need someone to announce another convention. If you have any, let me know on Twitter.
Or Chris Carter says, yep, in addition to Jordan Pele's version, I'm going to do season 12 without Gillian Anderson.
Or you just need another movie or another comic book series or something like that.
That's true. Can we have the Lone Gunman revival?
Do you want to write it?
No. It's looking ahead, but I'm not looking forward to that, where we have to pause after season 8 and watch all the Lone Gunman before we get to season 9. That's going to be rough.
But hey, at least we get to watch Millennium at some point too. I'm looking forward to that.
Yeah, that's off the end somewhere at the moment. Because we've passed the point where we could sort of integrate it in, so we'll have to do it separately.
True. It'll be fun.
It will. First up, we have The Field Where I Died, directed by Rob Bowman, written by Morgan and Wong, and first broadcast on the 3rd of November 1996. Guest stars. There's Kristen Cloak, who plays Melissa Rydell Ephesian, who you found out is Morgan's wife, which explains an awful lot. But anyway, you have seen her in other things.
Okay.
So she's in Final Destination.
Which one?
She's the teacher. She's the first Final Destination.
Of course she is, yes.
Yeah. So, yeah, she's in Final Destination. She's the teacher who gets horribly murdered partway through the film.
To be fair, most of them get horribly murdered in Final Destination.
That's true. But continuing the weird Morgan and Wong thing, she was in Black Christmas 2006.
Oh, I know who she is. Yes. Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
That's a bad film.
Yep. Keep on going. In Bizarrely Relevant, she was in Lady Bird, directed by Greta Gerwig, director of Barbie. She's also been in Quantum Leap. She's been in Cheers. She'll show up in Millennium, so continuing the Morgan and Wong thing. She was, of course, in Space Above and Beyond. But most interesting, and this one was a real surprise, she will co-write a future episode.
Which one?
You ready for this?
Oh, is it my favourite title?
RM95BG93ZXJZ!
You did better than me. When I had to say that in a previous episode, we had about 10 outtakes of me saying it.
It's really hard to do that. There's 2 other people of note. There's Michael Dobson, who plays the wonderfully named BATF agent. He is mostly notable for being a voice actor. So he was in Reboot, for example.
Oh, really?
Yes, as Powerlock, who I don't remember who that is, but... Yep.
That's nostalgic.
He's done a bunch of My Little Pony Friends of His Magic, and also Pony Life, which I think is the more recent My Little Pony that no one cares about in the same way.
Fair enough.
He was in Ranma Half, or the dub of Ranma Half.
Oh, neat.
As Gendo.
Okay, yeah.
He was in Escaflowne as Dryden Fassa, who I don't remember who that is. He's in Ghost in the Shell standalone complex as Takakawa. But then there's also Michael Massey, who played Vernon Ephesian, the leader of the cult, who was in Seven, very briefly.
Was he?
He's kind of like got a tiny role in the club where the sex worker's killed.
Okay.
He's in one of those scenes.
In the lust scene.
Yeah. He was also in The Game, that film you haven't watched.
I've never seen The Game.
He was in Catwoman, poor man. He was the Amazing Spider-Man and the Amazing Spider-Man 2. He was in Picket Fences, which I note, because we've never watched it, but that was the intended crossover episode.
Yes.
He's also going to show up in Millennium.
Okay.
And he's in an episode of House.
So, just to reiterate, nobody was in Buckaroo Banzai.
Not this time. Give him time, give him time. You know, it always comes back to Buckaroo Banzai or Frasier or Cheers in the end. Okay, The Field Where I Die. In Appleton, Tennessee, authorities receive a tip from someone named Sydney, alleging child abuse and weapon possession by a local cult called the Temple of the Seven Stars. The FBI and the BATF raid the temple's compound, but are unable to find its leader, Vernon Ephesian. Mulder experiences deja vu and walks out into the field of the compound, where he finds a trapdoor. Inside, they find Ephesian prepared to drink a red liquid with his 6 wives. Mulder stops him and handcuffs Ephesian, but feels a strange connection to one of the wives, Melissa Rydell Ephesian. Skinner warns the FBI and the BATF that Ephesian and his wives will be released in a day unless they can track down Sydney and the temple's reported weapons cache. The agents question Ephesian, who states there is no member of the temple named Sydney. When interviewing Melissa, she begins to talk like Sydney, claiming that Harry Truman is the current president. Scully believes Melissa is exhibiting multiple personality disorder, but Mulder instead thinks he is recalling a past life. The pair take her to the temple, where she takes on the personality of a woman from the Civil War and says the weapons were hidden in another secret bunker in the field. She goes on to state that Mulder, in a past life, was a Confederate soldier in the field with her, was her beloved, and that she watched him die. Mulder has Melissa undergo regression hypnosis to recount her past lives. She implies that she and Mulder have met in their past lives over and over, always to be separated or lost to each other. In order to confirm her events, Mulder is himself hypnotized and recalls a time when he was a Jewish woman with a son, who had the same soul as his sister Samantha. His deceased father, who is Scully, was dead at the time. Melissa was Mulder's husband in this previous life, and had been taken to a concentration camp by a Gestapo officer who was in fact Cancer Man. Mulder also recalls his past life from the Civil War, where he was a man named Sullivan Biddle, while Melissa was Sarah Kavanagh. Scully was Mulder's sergeant. Scully finds a picture of Biddle and Kavanagh in the county's Hall of Records and gives them to Mulder. The FBI and the BATF plan to make another search of the compound. Ephesian is released and realizes they will not survive another siege, distributes poison amongst the cult members while his men open fire on the FBI agents, and all but he and Melissa die. Melissa feigns drinking the red liquid. Mulder surrenders in order to get close to the temple. Ephesian then forces Melissa to drink the poison, and when Mulder arrives, he finds both of them dead. Mulder caresses Melissa, looking out into the field where he previously died. This is a controversial episode, but not for the reasons I would have expected.
Yeah, it turns out I was expecting this one to be a bit controversial, but this is one of the most divisive episodes of the X-Files of the lot.
So I'll start as I normally do, and I don't know if I hate this episode, but I was so bored.
Oh dear.
So bored watching this. I mean, the first thing I found while watching it again was that it's really hard to get a track of what on earth is going on at first. Because you start with the raid, which is a big...
Technically, you start with Mulder reading a passage from Paracelsus by Robert Browning, which is really quite an unusual start.
Okay. We start with the monologue from Mulder reading that, and he's staring at 2 photos, and there is a decent mystery hook, because we have no idea why he's there or what he's doing. We'll also note for any American listeners that we're not actually familiar with Robert Browning's work on the whole.
Yeah, when we learn about poetry in school, we have our romantic poets, our Shelley, Byron, Coleridge sort of thing. We don't really know much about Browning, I'm afraid.
The most I know about Browning, and this is really terrible, is he's quoted on the last line of Anne of Green Gables, which is "God's in his heaven, all's right with the world," which is the logo of Nerve from Evangelion. And yeah, they've chosen that as their logo, and that's about all I know about Robert Browning.
Interestingly, the first line that Mulder reads in that opening, I did have to look it up to make sure, but it's actually Browning took that from one of Percy Bysshe Shelley's poems.
Oh, okay.
It's a line from Prometheus Unbound, which also ties in quite interestingly with the themes of the episode.
Okay, so there's a certain logic to it.
Mm.
The monologue is a decent hook. I mean, it's very odd to hear Mulder quoting poetry anyway. But then it's then it's post-intro where we have the raid. And you as the audience have literally no idea what's going on here.
No.
Because they're bursting. It looks like it's just a government raid for some reason. And then Mulder and Scully are there and like, oh, find the weapons and where's a fusion? And you're going, what on earth is going on? Which I imagine is part of the point, but...
It's very clearly, and even more so at the end, supposed to invoke the Siege of Jonestown.
Yes. But I was trying to I was actually sort of struggling to write any notes at all at this point, because it's a case of what do you hang on to at the start of this? I mean, I also did think while we were going through this is that Morgan and Wong, this is probably the episode I've enjoyed of yours as the least so far. Mm. Normally Morgan and Wong is a good indicator, and this one just... I mean, even Home, which we didn't think we were going to enjoy much, turned out to be more enjoyable on the revisit.
Yeah, I was pleasantly surprised with Home.
This one, on the other hand, I remember not minding at the time, but on a closer watch, I don't know what you're trying to do.
I'll get into my investigations into this episode in a bit, but I was talking to someone on Twitter about this the other day, and it was... My feelings are, when I watched this as a teenager, I don't think I understood it.
No.
And rewatching it as an adult, I get it now, but I still don't enjoy it.
No. It's one of the ones where I'm sure some of the defenders could point to things like, before we get into fandom stuff about this, defenders of the episode in whole, the argument seemed to boil down to how it's shot, because it does look very nice. David Duchovny does a great turn on his acting. I think Gillian Anderson's not doing too bad either. And there's the point of they were running 18 minutes over at one point, so the fact they've had to cut a chunk out of this episode might not help it.
Apparently that included 2 personalities for Melissa.
Yeah, and since she only exhibits 2 past lives in this.
3.
Is it 3?
There's Sarah, the Civil War nurse.
Oh, okay.
There's Sydney.
Yeah.
And there's a little kid.
There was a child, yeah. One abiding memory I have of this episode, and I really don't know how I got hold of it, because in retrospect, it doesn't make a lot of sense, is I could swear that the first time I watched it, when then they get to the end and everyone's being distributed the poison, and you cut to Melissa and she's in the Sydney persona. In my memory, she's wearing sunglasses at that point. I don't understand how or where she'd have got them from.
A weird Mandela effect there.
Yeah, but it's that's that kind of character though, and I must say, Sydney's one of the most entertaining parts of the episode for me. I really like the kind of flippant, do-good, but also kind of seedy character.
He's very kind of like low-rank mobster sort of feel to him.
Yeah, but it's that kind of the hyperactive, but also not thoughts running fast in his mouth can keep up kind of feel to it.
I do feel, though, I've been trying to work it out in my head and I can't actually make it worse. Though the one thing we know about Sydney is if he is a past life, he was alive in Truman's administration.
Yeah.
Which would put him alive in wartime, which then conflicts with Mulder's belief that he was a Jewish woman who was married to Melissa's past life in Nazi Germany. You know, the timelines just don't add up.
Yeah, and I think we'll touch briefly on the past lives, because we're going to have to circle back to that for a different reason. The problem I have with the past lives in this one is this should be a fundamental shift to Mulder's perspective on everything, because he believes that he's fine with the concept of past life regression already, because of course we've had Born Again, which was the biggie really so far.
Yeah,
and that episode couldn't get into it really because there's not enough time and it wasn't the focus. But there'd no thought to him in that one of could he have had a past life, and suddenly this episode then brings it to the fore and says, yeah, you've had a bunch of lives and a weirdly cyclical life where you can't apparently detach yourself from this bunch of people who are just going to constantly be near you. Like, Scully will always be a factor in your life somehow. Samantha will always be a factor in your life somehow. Cancerman is going to be there. But also Melissa, who is new for us.
I guess she's always got to be new at some time in this cycle, though.
Well, true. It's just, it feels like if you did this as a revelation to a character, again, I think I get caught up in how 90s TV series write things and how they do it in the modern time. Is this should be, again, a fundamental shift to Mulder's whole universe and how he perceives everything. It's not coincidence that Scully was assigned to me, and it's not even machinations of anyone. This is fate, basically, is what he should be taking away from this now.
I feel fate isn't necessarily something Mulder should hold stock in, given he's not religious either.
No, but there's not a lot of other ways to explain how that could keep happening, is there?
No, it's the souls always being drawn together.
Yeah.
Your kind of almost Aristotelian look at this.
Well, the other perspective of the view that gives you of the universe is very strange then, because it indicates that you will always be close or intimate with the same group of people. Their relationship too will shift into bizarrely different angles and perspective, given Scully allegedly was Mulder's father in this past life.
I think there's a certain lack of unsexiness about that too. It's like, you and I are partners in this lifetime. Would I be able to look at you the same way I was thinking, oh, in that past life, Nick was my father?
Yeah.
It's just this odd Freudian kind of issue I have.
I'm going to put a pin in this, because this is going to be very fundamental to the later discussion, isn't it?
Quite.
We have to go back to that. But yeah, it feels like this should irrevocably change how Mulder sees a lot of things. And on the basis of Sanguinarium, absolutely not. He's back to business the next week. Doesn't care. He doesn't, though, does he?
Hilarious that Sanguinarium's going to be our next one.
Oh, I know. It's just, oof.
Uh.
But yeah, and just the other thing about it, though, is this whole search for the weapons cache, and they're sort of saying it's in the Civil War bunkers. And we can have your fact about this, which I think is a hilarious oversight on the writer's part.
Yes, the concept of bunkers did not exist in the Civil War. Or at least our language didn't work that way, as they would have been called shelters or bomb-proofs. So if Sarah, the personality who's supposed to be from the Civil War, is talking about this, why would she use the term bunker?
It's a very good question. I'd say the other, it's and that, and then you've got those weird scenes of Scully looking at old Confederate maps of the area, and couldn't you have tried this first if you knew this place was a Confederate place?
And does that mean that Mulder was actually a Confederate too?
Yeah, it does. I mean...
Well, that's less sympathetic.
It's less what are we doing? Never forget that the Vampire Diaries, one of them was a Confederate soldier.
Yeah, true.
And the family was actually aligned with the Confederates, even though the soldier was basically hated it and skipped out of it all the time. So, because it's set in Virginia or something, I think.
I am reading a book called Soulless at the moment by Gail Carriger, I think it is, which again is a paranormal, romancy, Regency era set sort of thing. And they argue that vampires would be Confederates because, of course, you've got slaves, you've got your thralls.
Yeah, I can see the logic.
Yeah.
Doesn't do well for modern romance, though, does it?
No.
So the other thing then, going back to just past life things, is the problem. Mulder should actually have a problem with this, though, because as far as I understand it, Born Again being an exception here, because that was a very weird position thing going on. The past life thing, though, is, as far as I understand it, and I imagine there's some weird exceptions to this, but it's usually you'll start having weird dreams or deja vu or something that will lead you to get the hypnosis to find out you've had this past life.
Yeah.
You don't switch into the old persona in the middle of a field somewhere.
No.
So what on earth is going on when Melissa can flip into the Sydney persona, the Sarah persona, and the unnamed child persona? I
will give it credit where credit due of at least their alternate personalities are boring.
Yes.
It's not, usually when you see this, and kind of in Ephesian as well, who believes he was round in biblical times.
Yeah, everyone does.
Is, that's what you get, is you're either Cleopatra or you were Cleopatra's handmaiden or something like that, is you're never something really boring like, I was a Civil War nurse.
Yeah. So the other weird thing, I don't think the episode really reconciles with it, or does it, and it doesn't do it very well, is Sydney is the person reporting they've got guns and abused children and everything. Sydney is coming at this from a 1930s, 40s perspective.
40s, yeah.
40s. Apparently does not suffer any culture shock. Because as much as the temple is very mildly kind of not Quakerish, very kind of a little bit Amishy, because they're a cult anyway, on a centralized compound.
Again, think Jonestown more. It basically is Jonestown.
Yeah, but it's the whole. He's not struggling with being 50 years out of date, and Sarah is not struggling with being a century out of date, which is one of these things you can't really simulate in the same way because it's only with these very isolated tribes, and if you transplant them into Middle Manhattan, what that would do to a person. But culture shock should be a factor in how these people are dealing with things, especially if Melissa is shifting into these personas. And the fact that she can do it so easily in Mulder and Scully's presence, but no one in the cult has ever noticed it's happening. Because you'd think Sydney would stand out a mile off if she flipped into that persona. So we've got confusion then is this like a voice kind of passengers in her head kind of thing again, which doesn't tie into past life regression, that ties back into multiple personality disorder, which is what Scully says at the start.
True.
And the other thing, of course, is the only people we prove the existence of is Sarah and Mulder's farmer life. The fact that Scully can go and look up these names and a sense of relationship but not be certain of it, but then find the photos and the name records, doesn't stop Melissa having done the same thing in advance for this to be a scam. I don't know why you're doing this as a scam, but she didn't offer that as a plausible explanation at any point.
It's not even necessarily a scam. It's thinking of it on the psychological aspect is you are susceptible to this kind of idea. You've gone and found out about this Civil War nurse and decided that was you.
Yeah.
In reading about this, you've discovered that nurse had a boyfriend or husband that they lost tragically. And then in this very stressful situation, you've pinned that and kind of said, you're my husband from this other life.
Yeah, and the logic the episode wants to operate under then is the fact that Mulder is then hypnotized to try and dig the same information out of him. But this comes after 3 seasons of Scully reinforcing every time, and particularly after Jose Chung, of going about how hypnotism can lead to confabulation. Given Mulder's in this mindset already.
We've even seen it in Mulder's recollections of what happens to Samantha, is we've had 2 different accounts of that, one of which was under hypnosis.
Exactly. So the fact that Mulder corroborates the Civil War aspect and has this very weirdo Nazi Germany thing going doesn't prove anything. And the fact that Scully just goes with it at this point, apparently, stopped trying to even sort of push back against it, is kind of frustrating. And I think you have a Twitter comment or something from someone that said, "Oh, hypnosis where someone else can just jump into the session and ask questions."
Yeah, credit where credit due. That's from Mulder's Nick shirt on Twitter, where she pointed out the fact that it's when you're under hypnosis, so yeah, naturally people can just randomly step in and ask additional questions.
Well, isn't one of the points in all the hypnosis scenes you usually see is
focus on my voice.
You'll respond only to my voice. That's the typical hypnotism setup. So Mulder can't just ask questions in the middle of this session. What the hell's going on? One of the other weird things then, and just hold off and get into the more controversial bit a bit longer, is I don't have a clue what this cult is up to. Other than just, bigamy, polygamy.
It does infer that in the episode, the fact that he believes that they're chosen soldiers by gods and they've got this cache of weapons somewhere on the premises because they're planning a violent takeover, as they believe that God will empower them and they will succeed. Whereas, Mulder's going to point out that no, everyone's going to die if you try this.
I suppose that's...
Again, that's your parallel with Jonestown.
Yeah. But, okay, that's the frustrating part, and maybe it was cut, but it's frustrating in the episode, is there's no revelation of where the weapons are. Given the whole focus of the episode is finding these weapons, or is that the mundane through line, which is keeping the episode moving, we don't know where they're hidden.
Think of them as your Ark of the Covenant, though. The actual point is Mulder and Melissa's relationship. The weapons are the MacGuffin.
I know, but I still think a scene of showing where they were, how the FBI and everyone else missed them.
But it doesn't matter anymore because everyone's dead.
Oh no, I meant when they arm up. when they get the weapons out.
And everybody dies.
Yeah, I know.
Weapons don't matter if no one's around to use them.
Oh, yes, I know, but before, when they sort of defend everything and before they hand out the poison, they've suddenly got automatic rifles from somewhere.
Well, they've got like 2 of them.
They've got 2 of them, which the FBI weren't able to find. Somehow.
That's 2, it's not a weapon cache.
I know, but that's what Sydney claimed. I'm sort of taking the multiple personality
disorder. This is America,
disorder.
where I think 12-year-olds have automatic rifles.
Well, that's a fair point. Okay, so I don't think we...
Have you ranted yourself out yet?
I might have ranted myself out.
Good. Would you like me to talk about fandoms?
Yeah, we can talk about fandoms. I did find the perspective on this kind of interesting in contrast to some other fandoms. We'll get to it as we get to it.
Okay, so I am not as loud and opinionated as Nick, but I must admit that I struggle with this episode because I don't disagree with him. Normally I try to form a balanced counter-argument for Nick's ranting. Unfortunately, dear listeners, I couldn't do it this time. So I turned to Twitter, and I kind of admitted that this is a controversial episode, and I asked people to weigh in on both sides about what they thought. And I did find it, as I thought, this episode is absolutely polarising in the fandom. And thank you so much for everybody who gave me your feedback, sent me videos, sent me your own reviews of the episodes and things like that to look at. It's really helped me form an opinion. So, most of the people who I did speak to were actually overwhelmingly positive about this. There were just a few that venomously hate it, and I mean venomously. I will credit again Fox Mulder's Nick shirt on Twitter, who told me that she hates 2 episodes of the series and this is one of them.
Please let us know the other one, because I'm very curious now.
But on the other side, we have several people who commended things about it. I'm going to especially credit Dana Scully's werewolf daughter, who has a YouTube channel called Dead Raccoons, where she posts like vlogs about episodes. Her one for this episode is called X-Files Analysis Number 4. Dead Raccoons says on her YouTube channel is that there are essentially 2 ways of reading this episode, and that's what splits the fandom. Is you have people who read into it as the fact that this is consolidating the fact that Mulder and Scully should not be a couple, because Mulder is historically destined to always be with this Melissa's soul, even though he and Scully are drawn together in every life. Whereas the other way that you can look at it, again I'm crediting Dead Raccoons for this, is the fact that there are different kinds of love, and even if Mulder has had these passionate relationships with Melissa, that doesn't mean they're the only passionate relationships in his life. And he and Scully are always drawn together, always have this closeness, because you've got this idea of predestination there.
Yeah. I mean, for the whole he and Melissa always a passionate affair, that's not quite how they do it in the episode. It's more like they're drawn together, so they'll always encounter each other at some point in their lives. I mean, if she's meant to be Mulder's love in the current iteration, and Mulder is basically screwed now because she's dead.
True. But again, if we're going on this basis, and I completely agree with Dead Raccoons on the fandom here, is I hate the idea of the Romeo and Juliet love.
Yes.
This is my one love forever and I will never find happiness again. Because that's not how humans work.
No. In my own personal experience, is if you engage with the Final Fantasy VII fandom, for example, and you end up with a very weird situation where this happens. Well, the former argument happens of these 2 are destined to be with each other. There can be no wiggle room. There is no other relationship for them. The way the fandom usually spins it, though, is as much as you say in human relationships, yeah, you don't have anything that hard and fast. The counter to that is usually, but this is a story, so you don't have to adhere to that. This is how stories work. This is predestination or whatever.
I've got a few more for you. Leaving aside the fandoms, although X-Files in a Loop also commented on the fact that they like the fact that this episode has made a Mulder and Scully romance ancient and unavoidable, which I liked the descriptor for.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
Yeah. But my favourite quote from the Twitter came from someone called Cerulean Milou, who verbatim the tweet just said, the episode has a bonkers ratio of amazing cinematography to not good acting, which gave me a little chuckle.
It's a point I made to you when we were watching it, and it feels a little bit mean, but I'm pretty sure Kristen Cloak is not the best actor, and I don't think she's actually capable of doing the multiple personality thing.
You say that, but a few of our...
I know a lot of people have actually praised her for it.
Actually highly praised her for it. X-Files in a Loop commented on that good acting, as did a couple of others. Pamela Stafford, I think, was another one on Twitter who commented that. There were also a lot of love-hate towards using Paracelsus in the opening. Some people thought it was beautiful, some thought it was pretentious, which I quite liked. And also, the people who commented on we have our fans who enjoy a good tragedy, which the episode is incredibly tragic.
It is tragic.
Nide called it sad poetry, and our Muldrake over on Twitter said that it was just tragic on the whole, but he also found it absolutely compelling the way it kind of evoked Jonestown and Waco. And, of course, later we'd have the connections with Heaven's Gate, which was after this episode aired.
Yeah, and Chris Carter astutely does not comment on.
Yeah, apparently he's been questioned about Heaven's Gate and its similarities with this episode, but won't comment on it quite understandably.
Do we have anything else for this episode, or shall we move to... Oh my god.
No, I think we can move on, but thank you again so much, everybody who I've just cited who helped me out on Twitter for this, and anyone I didn't mention as well. I did read all your comments, and I'm really glad we had this conversation. It gave me a lot more that we could talk about here.
Yeah, thank you all.
It's also interesting to see how the fandoms do view this episode, because, you know, a lot of our friends on Twitter still write fan fictions and things like that and are really involved in this Mulder Scully romance community.
Yeah, I mean, obviously not for a while, but I think we're going to want to prod them for input. For the future, actually, I think I want to get feedback on that.
I'm sure our beautiful friends will be happy to help out. Don't get ahead of yourself. We've still got to talk about Sanguinarium.
Yeah, I know. Okay. Sanguinarium, then. Directed by Kim Manners, written by Vivian and Valerie Mayhew. First broadcast on the 10th of November 1996. Guest stars. There's some interesting ones. So, Olan Jones played Nurse Rebecca Waite. She was in Seinfeld, and she was in the Bubble Boy episode as a waitress in the restaurant they stop at.
The Bubble Boy?
The Bubble Boy. She was in Edward Scissorhands, she was in Mars Attacks, she was in The Truman Show, and she was in Community as Garrett's mom.
Oh, right.
From the wedding episode.
Yes.
Andrew Airley as the attorney, that's his sole credit, but in a weird tangle of connections, he's in Final Destination 2.
Okay, yeah.
He's in Case 39, which I'm pretty sure you've seen.
Yes, I have, yep.
Apollo 18.
Yep.
50-50.
Yep.
And he's in 50 Shades of Grey, Darker and Freed.
I've seen all of those except 50 Shades of Grey, so...
But bearing the lead somewhat, of course, we have Richard Baymer, who plays Dr. Jack Franklin. But his first credit was a surprise.
Oh, really?
Right, he's in West Side Story. He's Tony.
Is he really?
He is.
I did not know that.
Yeah,
Well, that's classic.
That is. I mean, it's good. So for me, that's good. What, really? Tony? Yeah, he's
Was
Tony.
he also Tony's singing voice? Because that's cool, if so.
I didn't actually look that up, so... But yeah, he's Tony. But then his career goes a bit funny, really, after the highbrow West Side Story. Silent Night, Deadly Night 3.
Oh, gosh.
He's in a bunch of murders she wrote. He's in Star Trek Deep Space Nine, which I vaguely remember now I've actually read that. But of course, what we know him best for is in Twin Peaks as Benjamin Horne, owner of the Great Northern Hotel, and involved in a lot of shady stuff. He's actually one of the more interesting characters, although he's got his completely racially insensitive subplot in season 2.
Oh, yeah.
And he did make it into the revival, thankfully, along with most of the people. But
he's one of the most detestable characters in Twin Peaks.
He is, but he's also... It's never a bad thing when a plotline focuses on him, except for his mental breakdown one, which we try not to talk about too much. But he's great at being really sinister in Twin Peaks, and you're not sure how to deal with him at any point, really. Because he could turn on you very easily, and he's got just all his weird interactions and his connections to One-Eyed Jacks, the casino / whatever was going on north of the border.
It'd be fun to actually go through Twin Peaks at some point, but that's going to be so hard.
Yeah. Dark Skies, obviously, I just want your reactions to Dark Skies, because I think it'd be hilarious. Twin Peaks is certainly an option, although it's going to be hard going getting into the revival, given you didn't make it through the first time. But the first season at least will be fun, and then second season's going to be... Yeah, the second season's going to be the second season. And a few other super... Oh no, we were going to do Strange though, because we want to get more people to watch Strange.
I am absolutely going to do Strange at some point.
But anyway, would you like to give us a synopsis of Sanguinarium?
If I must. Our episode this time takes place in a hospital in Winnetka, Illinois. We open on Dr. Harrison Lloyd looking particularly unwell. He performs what should be a routine liposuction operation, however we quickly see him begin to remove so much fat from the patient that the patient dies painfully. Following this experience, Lloyd tells Mulder that he killed the patient because he believed he was possessed, that he was inside the body and could see what was happening but had no control of his actions. Scully, on the other hand, is very skeptical about Lloyd's claims. She believes that he's just making it up so he can escape the consequences. Mulder and Scully inspect the operation room and discover 5 points burnt into the floor. He links the points and makes a pentagram shape, and therefore begins to suspect that witchcraft may have played a part. Meanwhile, despite the fact that the rest of the staff at the clinic are utterly shocked about what happened, this doesn't stop another plastic surgeon, Dr. Ilacqua, from murdering an elderly patient with a surgical laser, burning a hole straight through her cheek and neck and severing her brainstem. When Scully interviews Ilacqua, it's much like her interview with Lloyd was previously. He claims that he has no memory of the incident, his last memory is going home for the day. Mulder's suspicions begin to strengthen about the witchcraft involvement when he reviews a tape of the second murder and sees a pentagram pattern on the stomach of the victim. The hospital's coordinator, Dr. Teresa Shannon, tells Mulder about a similar series of deaths that occurred at the same hospital but 10 years previously. She suspects that a nurse, Rebecca Waite, who was the only person present at the 2 current death scenes, is responsible because she was also at the hospital 10 years prior but then left for a period of time. Mulder and Scully visit Waite's house and discover a lot of strong evidence that she practices witchcraft. However, the audience soon learns that the evidence was actually planted there by a staff member of the hospital. Meanwhile, Dr. Jack Franklin returns to his house and is assaulted by Waite, who is hiding for him in his bathroom in a bathtub full of blood. Waite is arrested on the scene and approached by Mulder and Scully, who attempt to question her. However, this is prevented when Waite begins to start vomiting straight pins and dies of extreme internal hemorrhaging shortly after. After this, Mulder visits Franklin and hopes to learn more about Waite's possible motivation. Franklin does seem to be innocent, however, as soon as Mulder leaves the room, he lies back on his bed and begins to levitate, smiling cruelly to himself as he does so. Later, Mulder manages to deduce that all the birthdays of the victims match up with dates of the witch's Sabbath, and that Waite was actually a white witch who was trying to protect the victims from Franklin. The pentagrams that she had placed at the scenes were actually protective symbols, in the hope of shielding them from Franklin's dark magic. This is also the explanation of why Waite was trying to kill Franklin, of course. Mulder also figures out the fact that if Waite was not the murderer, that means that the spree of murders has not finished this time. This is almost immediately confirmed as another patient at the hospital is murdered, this time their face melted away with acid during a skin peel. The agents meet again with Dr. Shannon, who further tells them about the spree of murders that occurred 10 years ago. According to Shannon, there were 5 deaths at the time, 4 of them were patients, the other was a cosmetic doctor called Clifford Cox, who died of a drug overdose shortly after. Although Cox's date did not align with the Sabbath, Mulder believes that he was involved in the crimes. He uses a special program on the hospital's computer to determine what Cox would look like if he underwent heavy and impossible plastic surgery. The computer produces an image that looks just like Franklin. Mulder therefore deduces that he is the murderer and he somehow is Clifford Cox in a disguise. Shannon manages to corner Franklin alone in a blood-splattered operating room, but he uses witchcraft to magically teleport a lot of surgical tools into her intestine, causing her to immediately start bleeding internally. Shannon is rushed into surgery, but somehow survives. Meanwhile, we see Franklin removing the skin of his face and performing a ritual to make him appear younger and escapes. This is somewhat confusing that he's managed to succeed given Shannon's survival, but we see that Shannon was always intended to be a red herring, covering the fact that another patient has been killed elsewhere in the hospital. It is heavily implied that Franklin's actions are purely for vanity's sake, that he is murdering people in an attempt to gain eternal youth. The episode ends with a now younger Franklin applying for a position at another medical hospital.
Thank you. It's been a while since Scully got so swept up by the implausible, unscientific explanations as this, because I think Pilot was a weird one to go back to because she sort of buys into Mulder's bizarre theories with no evidence. And this one, she basically stops protesting after a point and starts saying, oh, yes, this one was also born on a witch's Sabbath. Like, Scully, please listen to what you're saying.
How would you explain it rationally, Nick?
Oh, I don't know either.
Thank you.
But at the same time, though, this is meant to be Scully's thing, though, isn't it?
If you can give me a rational explanation,
I can't.
I think Scully has followed Occam's razor to its point here.
To a point, but it's still... She's usually meant to offer... I mean, admittedly, I complained in Unruh about her really weak counter-arguments for the supernatural. But in this one... I mean, so some of it also is a bit clutching at straws, like when Mulder points out the pentagram burned into the floor. And, oh, it could be from something else. Yeah, really? Five marks?
Oh, no. If you head over to our Twitter from earlier this week, I have strong feelings towards those symbols on the floor and Mulder reading the script, in that I, too, have linked those to form an arrow pointing at the Doctor, so therefore I'm going to use this to deduce that the Doctor is guilty. It was the first Doctor all along. The marks in the floor are an arrow pointing at him, showing his guilt. And I believe that my argument has as much credence as Mulder's in this case.
I just thought it was a pentagon.
Just a pentagon under him. So it's the US Department of Defense that's responsible for the whole thing.
Exactly. See, military-industrial complex, it's all coming together now.
You kind of jumped in at the start there, but I should, as I said at the end of last week's episode, I detest Sanguinarium.
Oh, yeah.
My feelings towards the field where I died are pretty much indifference more than anything, but I hate this episode. I absolutely flipping hate it.
It just feels very just nasty, isn't it?
That's my entire problem with it, is that I am a fan of horror movies, and I think I would have accepted this if it was just a horror movie set in a plastic surgery department like that. This isn't what I expected the X-Files.
No.
I'm getting into my horror discourse here, but I am a personal believer there are 3 kinds of ways to scare an audience. So you have the visceral, which is what this very much is we're just going to be as grisly as possible and disgust our audience and make them squeamish that way. You've got the jump scare, so the ones that just temporarily scare your audience by having lots of things jumping out at you shouting. And you got dread, which I think good horror should aim for dread. Which I will give to Unruh from last week.
Yeah.
Is an episode that sticks with you because it just gets under your skin. I think X-Files on the whole is actually pretty good at building dread at times, but this visceral, gruesome episode, and it's by far the goriest episode we've seen, just doesn't feel like an X-Files episode.
No, and I think there's a note on the production of this is, at this point, they got what were called spec scripts, which are just people who submit scripts to the series. This is where Final Destination comes from. That was a spec script originally. And this was also a spec script that was then sort of went through some rewrites and polishing and flipped the identity of the killer from female to male.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Originally, Dr. Franklin was going to be a woman.
Okay. I kind of like the fact he's male more, to be honest.
Yeah, I think so. And I think it's different to how you'd normally do it, obviously. Did feel a bit, it's kind of weird how little he's actually on screen. Given, you think you'd put him in the pre-credits bit just to set him up as a person. But he doesn't come into that first board meeting, does he? He's actually held back surprisingly far.
I must admit, I quite like that first board meeting because I feel it evoked Dehander de Valets quite a lot.
Yeah.
When you've got they're sitting around a table which has a pentagram shape in the centre of it, talking in a way that makes it sound like they're covering something up.
Yeah.
Which kind of is the point in Dehander, but it's just misdirection here.
Yeah.
But I kind of liked that because that bit I thought kind of drew the attention. It's like, oh, what are the board of the hospital up to?
The other highlight of the episode to me was Mulder's fascination with the rhinoplasty and how this kind of connects back to Humbug.
Ah, yeah.
But basically, he sort of there's that extended scenes of messing around on the plastic surgery computer and sort of putting a pencil up to his nose and checking how straight it is.
Yeah. Just to foreshadow using that computer later.
Yeah, but it's the fact they've done it by making Mulder it looks like he's contemplating it. He actually is considering doing this. I think is a great touch. Really, that connects back to Humbug for me, at least the Dr. Blockhead's estimation of Mulder at the end of that episode.
Yeah. It's interesting now you say, though, that it was originally written for a woman, because you kind of expect women to be vain and women to want plastic surgery more than men. So having a vain male villain is kind of more interesting.
Well, and that's exactly why the flip was made, because otherwise, it's very typical.
It's the reoccurring phrase in this episode is vanitas vanitum, which is like vanity of the vanities.
So that all fits together quite nicely. I suppose one thing is, in the X-Files, we're used to the villain creature, whatever, potentially surviving and possibly not in the best of ways, but it's there at the end. We're not used to the villain walking out and succeeding.
Not in that way,
Not in that way, no.
Which I guess makes it even more unpleasant, because you get the idea that Dr. Franklin's just immediately going off to do this again.
True, although I did feel the episode, there is a bit of confusion, or they've carefully left it out of, is he seeing someone else's identity? Or is he just creating a new one? Because you'd think it would be creating a new one, but for him to get that job at the end, he's got to have a track record.
I think you've got to go with the, it's got the same issue as Squeeze.
Yeah.
I think the idea is he's creating a new identity.
Exactly, but he has to have a presence to get that high-flying job.
When she says, oh, look how successful you are.
Exactly.
Where's he got all this success from? I thought, that's just a writing issue, isn't it?
It is, because, then you'd say he must be the doctor at the hospital in this episode, so eventually someone's going to say, wait a minute, that guy died in that tragedy.
I think there's some severe, clumsy writing, and a lot of it is through this episode's misrepresentation of Wicca. Yeah. More than anything. You have I'm going to keep coming back to it, is the 5 points on the floor, which bother me greatly, is when Mulder looks at it and kind of can tell from these marks things like, oh, the pentacle is inverted. No, they're 5 points on the floor. You have no concept of which way is up. How do you know this is inverted?
Didn't he say something about the compass directions for it? But it's a weak one.
All right, what about the one that's on the woman's chest?
I know.
How do you know which way we're looking at this? Which way is up here?
Head is point way up.
You have the fact that she's Nurse White, which I quite like as well, because of the it's spelled the same way as the Rider White tarot deck.
Oh, okay.
Not white like the colour, white like Rider White. Which, again, cute. You also had the 4 pagan holidays that he mentions, one of which he calls Rudemas, and Rudemas is actually a Christian holiday, so good research there. Is Beltane, I think they were actually looking for. But it's just lazy writing that could have been fixed easily. And I can see why apparently they got a lot of hate mail from people who practice Wicca, and I can completely understand why.
Yeah, the synopsis says it, and I can't remember if the episode implies it, the whole sort of, the evidence has been planted at Nurse White's home. But it's a case of, but it looks about the same as when she was doing whatever she was doing before she went to kill Dr. Blake.
Yeah, that's true. She was doing the burning her hair ritual.
Yeah, and naked for whatever reason she needs to be naked.
It's her very dramatic attempt at killing him by apparently being able to hold her breath for half an hour in a bathtub full of blood to leap out at him.
Yeah, and it's one of these ones where you go, okay, I can see for visual dynamicism why you've done that. Why have you done this? You could just hide around a corner with a dagger.
It looks flipping cool in his kind of white minimalist bathroom, but beyond that, why? What is the point? How have you even done this?
Well, and also, why do you clue him into your presence in the house? Because if you hadn't messed with his lights and written Vanitas Vanitum on the glass screen, you could hide in a cupboard, wait for him to sit down to dinner, and then jump him.
To be fair, if we were going this way, just cut the brakes on his car.
A thing that no one bothers with, yeah. And I do like the reveal, though, that he's not on the level when he levitates. And I also like the way they do the shot, though, where basically the camera moves as he's lying on the bed, and it's a case of, wait, something's wrong with this shot. And the reveal he's actually floating is pretty good, I thought.
You also have some weird plot cul-de-sacs in there, because I'm not sure if we ever really got to the bottom of how the black magic ritual works in this. Because at first it seems, and I did like the little nod to the mangler, to be fair, in it. The medication, it's the fact that the medication has, I think it's belladonna in it?
Yes.
So belladonna's deadly nightshade, which, deadly poison but is used in medicines, fair enough. I don't believe for a second that there is only one medication in the world that contains belladonna, like Mulder claims. It's this one antacid.
Yeah, and also we stopped bothering to specify if everyone else is on the same
Yeah,
pills.
the first two it's mentioned are taking this prescription antacid, but I wasn't sure if that was misdirection or if that was part of Dr. Franklin's ritual in some way. As I said, it's a plot point in the mangler as it's somebody drops some pills into the machine and combined with a bunch of other things, that's a reagent that causes it to become evil and possessed.
Yeah.
But
to expand off from that as well, so looking at the previous instance where 4 patients died and then the doctor died, and we know that's Dr. Franklin in his previous life.
That's Dr. Cox.
Yeah, and the fact that they don't seem to mention in the previous instance that the doctors were culpable. It seemed to be either 5 mysterious deaths, or was it 5 deaths by doctors previously?
I think it inferred the fact that they were very, very sus deaths, because Dr. Shannon mentions the fact that the hospital covered it up because it would have been a black mark against their plastic surgery program.
Yeah, but I think you needed to specify whether it's just the former doctor botched these surgeries to kill them to get his spell working, or he did the same thing as this time and possessed 4 other doctors to make them do the thing. What also struck me about this is it's kind of got double whammy magic you don't normally get. Because you'll possess people to kill someone because you want to kill them. You don't normally possess someone to get them to kill someone so you can cast your magic spell to make yourself useful again. Because that's an order of magnitude more complicated than just going and murdering them yourself, isn't it?
So when you're thinking the way cult rituals work normally in media is there's normally some kind of direct effect. So you've got your sacrifice bound on the altar, and there's your direct cause to it happening. This seems really, really vague when you've just got them on various days at various points around the hospital, and yet it affects you at the end of it.
Yeah, I mean, the contrast I would then say is the Hander, because Mrs. Paddock was very direct. I mean, Mrs. Paddock is a demon or Satan himself, and she was way more hands-on than Dr. Franklin.
But also the fact that that's kind of different, because Dr. Franklin is a dark wizard, but at the end of the day, he's just a very vain man. Nurse Paddock was something supernatural that was coming to get revenge on these people who had lost their faith.
But she had to explicitly make the motions to slit wrists and to sort of burn stuff to take control of people. Whereas he's just kind of the whole, yep, I'm going to teleport these surgical instruments into you while my doctor down the hall kills someone.
He also does the weird misdirect as well, because he's got the pentacle engraved in his house, that he's engraving all the names of his victims on the cardinal points. But he engraves Shannon's name on there, and she's the misdirect. So that pentacle doesn't have anything to do with the ritual, even though we've seen him nakedly carving in it previously.
The hands-off thing is really weird as well. The other thing that struck me, and I feel that they tried to excuse it with the whole boom nature of plastic surgery at this point in time, you would still expect to do, if you're corresponding things to witches' Sabbaths, to do it on the Sabbath, not find someone born on the Sabbath.
What are the odds that in this short period you will have people with the 4 dates that you need as a percentage?
But I also don't buy cosmologically that works. Because that's never how it's depicted. It's got to be the right day. Because this is syzygy. This is celestial alignment kind of stuff. The X-Files have specified that's how things work in this universe. And this one says, no, if they're born on the right day, it works just the same as doing it on the right day.
I must admit, I don't know a lot. I have some Wiccan friends, but I don't know a lot about Wicca myself. But I'm pretty sure these cardinal dates normally align with things like solstices and stuff like that. Yeah. So because Wicca is so heavily entwined with nature, these are powerful dates on the calendar, which would feed in exactly to what you're saying is it should be something you are doing on this date.
Exactly.
On this particularly magical day or something like that.
Not it's their birthday.
So, I mean, we all know the famous one, Samayan, Halloween. The date when the veil between the living and the dead's supposed to be at its thinnest.
Exactly.
That's a day when you feel like something magical should happen.
And as a result, it feels implausible in the span of 3 days, I think, that they've had these plastic surgery operations with people whose birth dates correspond to those dates.
I'm also amazed that they've said about great hospital cover-ups because they get most of their money from the plastic surgery department, which I'm sure is probably actually true.
Yeah.
However, in this day and age, and even in the time this was written, could you really cover 3 gruesome murders on consecutive days in the same hospital like that? And not just, med-mal in something has gone wrong, but this doctor has poured acid over someone's face sort of murders.
Well, it's also worth noting that they've completely failed because the FBI are already here. It's too late. The fact they're here at all means you can't contain it now.
It's just ridiculous. And it's one of these stories where the more you pick at it, the more it unravels.
Yeah. And again, that feels very odd. I mean, should probably check if this pair has ever written anything else, but it feels like this is the kind of thing you would get as a spec script, but it feels like not enough work was done to it to bring it up to the level of other things.
Did you hear the chain of logic that got the story to where it was?
I think I skimmed it, but I can't remember.
It was one of this pair that wrote the episode got a phone call from an unknown number, and they realised, all right, they were advised by Morgan and Wong, I think it was, that they should write about things they know. And it's like, all right, yeah, getting a call from an unknown number is something that's scary. From which they got in their head, it's like, also getting an unknown page would be scary. And what's the kind of person that has a pager?
Oh my god.
And that's why it's set in a hospital.
Oh, that hurts.
Yeah. It's the string of logic that went into how this wound up being a story set in a hospital where people die. And I will just go on to that. I said it in the content warning, is that's the only area of this episode where I think it actually is scary. It's the idea of there's not a time when you're much more vulnerable than when you've been anaesthetised and you're awaiting surgery.
Yeah.
Which is what all these victims are. That's much like we spoke about last week with Unruhe, it's a time when somebody is completely vulnerable, and it's a level above on the villain when he's taking advantage of that vulnerability. But that alone is scary. I didn't need the ridiculous amounts of red paint poured over every scene in it.
Well, as a weird contrast, then, I will offer the film Coma by Michael Crichton.
I've read the book, yeah.
And so that, I've only seen the film of it, but that one does get really kind of tense and frantic as you come towards a conclusion with, I can't remember what her relationship was in the end. The woman who's been wheeled into the OR where he's got the carbon monoxide set up, who's going to just put her into a coma like everyone else. And there's the rush to get to the cylinder before it can actually happen and everything.
Yeah. And
yeah, that's your model, really, for this kind of thing.
You also have it even on a lesser degree of recent movies like Unsane, where you have somebody's been committed against their will and they're left powerless.
Yeah.
They're at the mercy of all these doctors. There's nothing they can do to get out of this situation. That loss of control and that loss of power and vulnerability is what makes it scary.
Yeah, and for the highbrow people, this is Kafka's The Trial.
True, yeah.
The whole, you'll try and push back against the authority. The authority does not care and will not explain itself to you.
But again, from the Menmal's perspective, it's like that we like to think that we put ourselves in the hand of a doctor, that doctor's going to act with our best interest and take care of us. For the story where people are being left vulnerable and then murdered by their doctors.
But murdered in... Well, I suppose that's the other thing you get to as well, is it's not just a murder, is it, though? It's an over-the-top, unnecessarily gruesome murder. Because, again, if you've got the patient anaesthetised, you could slit their throat with a scalpel.
Yeah.
Nothing they can do about it. You don't have to liposuction them to death. You don't have to laser them to death. You don't have to melt their face off.
And whatever happened to that last guy, because that looked blooming gruesome too.
Well,
you only see him briefly in a corridor, but there is a lot of ripped sheets and blood, and it doesn't look like it went down too well.
I can see it is if this was somehow a factor of this magic. There has to be... I mean, you could do it like you have to get a certain amount of body fat or something for the process for the first one. I don't know what you're going to do with the laser one, and maybe you could make the acid one of that's removing that person's face so he can then take that face. There is a way to do a logic to the over-the-topness, but
I guess
that's
you
missing.
have with the variety of surgical procedures you can have for plastic surgery, it's each corresponds to something he would need for this transplant.
Yeah, so liposuction will give you the fat.
Fats,
yeah.
You've got skin.
Yeah.
You would need like bone or muscle or something like that.
Yeah.
And maybe those would be your 4 cardinal points you need.
Yeah, and apologies.
It's a bit like making a human in Full Metal Alchemist, but beyond that.
Yeah. And apologies, we're kind of rewriting the episode here, but it's that idea feels like it should have been integral. That kind of actually ties everything together properly.
I mean, and we should have mentioned it previously, this is kind of what we see when Mulder uses the insane computer, which is the X-Files photo fit machine on acid this time round. In the fact that it's like, yes, we have this device, which, again, I'm sure exists, a computer program to show you before and after your plastic surgery procedure. But he starts saying, make the eyes further apart. The woman's saying, but Mulder, that's impossible. No, just do it. It's like, what a coincidence. If I change every aspect of the man's face, it does look like Dr. Franklin.
And it might just be me, because I'm actually kind of terrible with faces, but it didn't look that much like Dr. Franklin.
It was enough, I think.
It was enough, but it's one of those, you're messing with a non-existent technology in Photoshop. You could just leave it at a picture of Richard Bramer, and that would be fine.
I just couldn't get past the level of it. Yeah, just change his eyes, nose, cheekbones, hair. Now he does look like him.
But
I can do that with any picture.
But then you get to, but Mulder, that's impossible. It's like, yes, and the program apparently doesn't have that as a constraint, saying you can't change this setting because it doesn't work.
Strangely, we don't have a way to make a person's eyes go further apart.
Well, I'd have expected a bit more if she said, can't do it like this. I'm just going to open Photoshop and start doing it directly.
Pen and paper.
I don't know if Photoshop actually existed at that point in time or not. It might have been... No, she sort of gets the photo and she gets out her airbrush and starts just touching it up. Do you have much else for this episode?
No, I think I have ranted enough. And I'm sorry, I normally try to see the positive, but...
These were two bad episodes.
This is just atrocious. And I will give our X-Files fans on Twitter, I enjoyed The Field Where I Died more than I enjoyed Sanguinarium.
It doesn't make you uncomfortable in the same way.
It's not just discomfort, it's a terrible episode.
Well, yes.
The writing is atrocious. It needs, 10 more rewrites to it.
So it needs to be refocused somehow.
Deep breaths. Rant is over. I can stop. I'm more positive about next week. Next week's 2 episodes, Musings of a Cigarette-Smoking Man, and Tunguska, the first part of our next Conspiracy 2-parter.
Ooh. That'd be fun.
Yeah, Again, I'm remembering back after years and years since I watched these the first time, but I remember them both being good. I'm not as negative as I feel towards our last 2 episodes, so we should be good. We can do this.
We can do this. Hooray! In the meantime, if you'd like to get hold of us, our email address is thingsthegettingstrange42@gmail.com.
You can also find us on social media. We're on Twitter and Tumblr at GetStrange42. We're on Mastodon at GetStrange42@universedon.com. And you can find us on Facebook by searching for Things Are Getting Strange, an X-Files Rewatch podcast.
We have Patreon, patreon.com/thingsargettingstrange, where any contribution will be gratefully received, where we are doing a Let's Play of the X-Files game.
Is episode 2 out yet?
It is not as yet, because I discovered a problem with the audio, which
Oh no.
Yeah, I think I can fix it, but it's going to be involved.
Oh dear. Oh well, we have 1 episode of the Let's Play up now. Hopefully, when Nick gets this problem resolved, we'll have the next one up for you shortly. There are 3 different tiers on our Patreon at different prices. Just to be clear, if you back us at any level, you will have access to the Let's Play and any future things we might add on there.
Our theme music is envisioned by Kevin MacLeod. You can find that on compotech.com, licensed under the Creative Commons by Attribution 3.0. Thank you all for listening, and until next week, remember, Vanitas Vanitum.